Well, I am pretty excited to be here today, and not just because I managed to emerge victorious over the nasty flu that took down my entire family this week, so it's really good to be here. The other reason I'm really excited about being here today is that I want to share something with you that's very dear to my heart and that came this close to not happening at all. About a year ago, I found myself in a room full of women entrepreneurs. And a moment of clarity, I decided to make an incredibly audacious announcement. I literally stood up and I said, I want to start a revolution that is going to completely transform the way we as women experience our lives. And while the reception that day in the room was fantastic, my butt had not even hit my seat before the stories and the voices in my head started to crank up and have a field day with that. You know the voices I'm talking about, right? But here's the thing. I was so clear about why this revolution had to happen. I was done with watching myself and other incredibly brilliant women with phenomenal gifts to share with the world, keeping themselves small and keeping their gifts buried under this set of stories. Self-limiting stories that are essentially coming from these voices in our head and our BS. I was done with watching women continue to let ourselves slide off the bottom of our to-do lists. I was done with witnessing self-care become defined by an annual trip to the spa. There's so much more to self-care than that. So all this happening because somewhere along the way we decided that we aren't worthy of our own love and acceptance, or that we aren't good enough to deserve our dreams and desires. So yes, a revolution that day was born in my heart, and my personal and professional mission came together with powerful clarity. So I started to dive deep into this question of how to spread the word and the whispers of this revolution amongst the people so that we could rise together. And a poem started to come to me. But there was one tiny problem. I don't do poetry. I'm simply not the poetry type. And I'm not dissing the poets out there. Huge respect, huge gratitude, but me? Nuh-uh, not my gig. But this poem literally kept knocking on my door. And it rolled into this epic battle of wills between this poem and my determination to find another way, something other than poetry. So as I'm neck deep in this battle, I remember a piece of wisdom from Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. The more important a call is to our soul's evolution, the more resistance we will feel toward pursuing it. So I got curious. And I wondered, when exactly had I decided that I didn't do poetry? It took me back to grade 10 English writing class. 15 years old, flat-chested, mouthful of braces, riddled in prepubescent angst, and we've been asked to write a poem. And I thought, all right, maybe this is my chance to really tune into my deepest feelings and desires and to pour those emotions out onto the page, because that's what poets do, right? So I did. My poem was entitled Afraid. And every line started with afraid of. 26 lines of everything that I was terrified of as a 15-year-old girl. And finished with afraid of never not being afraid. So this experience of just pouring it all out onto the page was surprisingly cathartic, freeing, even empowering. So I figured, well, with that experience, I'm going to actually hand this thing in. So I carefully transcribed it onto a fresh sheet of paper and tucked that word afraid carefully next to that red margin over and over and over again. And into the hands of my teacher it went. So I'm waiting the response. And of course, I'm convinced I'm going to be seen in a whole new way, this emerging poet capturing the essence of my generation. At very least, I was sure that she was going to ask me to stand up and read it to the class. But mostly, I think I felt a sense of deep relief that I'd finally found a way to share the real me and to have that be seen. So the afternoon we get our poems back. I hustle upstairs to class, and it's this long, narrow classroom with blackboards all across the front And, the desks are arranged in pods, very 1980s. And I'm kind of expecting this moment as I enter the classroom. I'm expecting to be greeted with this warm, knowing smile from my teacher. Little head cock. But she's busy scribbling something on the board, so I just slide by and grab my seat. She starts handing the poems back, and I hear my name from the far aisle. And I look up again to connect with her, and I see the back of her head, and she's calling out the next name. I grab my poem, and the first thing I see is that the red margin is no longer the only red on the page. It's been joined by 28 red circles and some red writing in the upper right-hand corner. In the title and every line below, a big fat red circle cutting through every utterance of the word afraid. I had spelled afraid with 2 F's. And in the upper right-hand corner, if you're going to write an entire poem centered around a single word, you might want to consider spelling it correctly. Now, I don't remember much else about that class, but I do vividly remember the sound that poem made as it hit the bottom of that round metal garbage pail as I walked out the door that day. And I also distinctly remember deciding that poetry was stupid, and that anyone who obsesses about spelling is a bit of a dumbass. So 3 decades pass, and I've never written a poem since, nor frankly really put anything of my heart onto a page for someone to read. So here's the fascinating thing, though. Clearly, this experience had a pretty significant impact and lasting repercussions. But until I started to unpack this, thanks to that cat fight with the poem last year, I had completely forgotten all about this happening. And I hadn't even noticed what I'd been missing out on all these years, something that I'd been decidedly yet unconsciously avoiding: writing. But a subconscious part of me obviously did remember, right down to the sweet cotton ginny track pants I was wearing that day. And that part of me has been making some pretty big decisions on my behalf for a long time. So I invite you to get curious. What have you decided that you don't do? What have you stopped doing that once brought you great joy? So in the name of deciding to thrive and deciding to do things differently, that poem, the one about the revolution, I did write it, and I'd love to share it with you today. I wrote this poem for me, and I wrote this poem for my 2 daughters, and I wrote this for every single one of you. So, without further ado, the first poem since my grade 10 debut piece, Afraid. Today I bring you The Playground Rules. When we decide to thrive, we play by a different set of rules. Welcome to our playground. Here, curiosity replaces judgment, community and connection triumph over competition and comparison, and living with ease trumps busyness and overwhelm. Here, the relentless pursuit of enough is finally laid to rest, and synergy replaces scarcity. Here, you bravely dance with your fear, and radical self-care becomes the greatest love affair of your life. Here, leaning into joy matters more than what anyone else thinks. Science meets soul, creativity and play are our way home. Here, devotion to your deepest desires becomes your sacred responsibility. And thriving is a courageous choice, one we make 1,000 times a day. So rise up, sisters, give yourself permission, join the revolution, and decide to thrive.